So a few of my friends, we took a road trip up to Portland, Oregon, and it was for a bachelor's party, which turned out to be like a foodie trip. And we came across this Russian restaurant called Kachka. And, while we were waiting for our food, we got curious and asked, why was it called Kachka? And the waitress was telling us that it was actually a word that was used by the owner's grandmother, and this goes back to 1941, right during World War II. The owner's grandmother was actually trying to make it to Ukraine after leaving her town, which is I believe Bobar in Belarus, and she was being hunted down. And when she comes across like the borderline, there was like a Nazi soldier who was checking people and noticed her and came to the conclusion that she's a Jew, and she's disguised as a Ukrainian woman. And when she was confronted at the gate going into Ukraine, she claims that she is Ukrainian, and you know, based on how she looked, the soldier had a hard time believing that. So he asked her a question, which is, if you claim to be Ukraine, then how do you say duck in Ukrainian? And so she was nervous because all she knew was just a bit of Russian, Belarus, and Yiddish. And so she figured this was going to be the end for her, but she took a huge risk and just said out this word, Kachka. And after that, the soldier picked up his keys and opened up the gate and let her through. Because it turns out in Ukraine, Kachka is also how they say duck. So that word ended up saving her life, and she lived on to be able to, live a good life. And her children, grandchildren made it all the way to better opportunities, but most importantly, they all lived. And so that's the reason why the owner of the restaurant named the restaurant Kachka, because of that story. And it always gets me every time because that kind of story always leads to great opportunities, like a restaurant for someone's granddaughter. So that is one epic origin story that I will not forget. Hey everybody, this is Jason Lore with Jason Lore Photography and Films, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast series Real Talks with Filmmakers. And today's episode is actually going to be on origin stories, which is like the one you just heard, a couple minutes ago. Hope that was very inspiring, just as it was for me. I always admire origin stories because I'm just a curious guy. I love knowing. I'm sorry, knowing or trying to learn as much as I can about like certain things or people, because there's always a story behind everything, everyone, and it just is so fascinating. Just like Kachka, and now you see that every day, in films too, is like origin stories, or as we like to call them, prequels. So the reason why they're so popular is because when you have like great stories with great characters, great universe, great worlds, it raises up the question of like, what happened before all this, or how did a certain character came to be the way they are, or how cities were created in that town, or no, sorry, in that story. It's like we want to know more. Some people actually Google it up or research it to try and find answers. But the thing is that it all depends on the writer, if he or she actually created like a origin story for the characters. For me, I like to create profiles, kind of like in like those detective films or stories where they have a profile of like the people that they're looking for, where they're from, how they look, and that just helps me like have a more understanding of like the characters as well. And also, in case someone is wondering, hey, why is your character the way they are, it's like, oh, because of this and this. Same thing with like the city or the kingdoms, or depending on which story it is, right? There's always a story behind that story that I like to create, because there's a reason behind everything, as I always like to say. But in this case, there's a story behind everything. So, like I said, like when you watch a film, or sorry, not a film, but when you watch movies nowadays, there's a lot of prequels to a lot of very popular movies out there. I mean, some examples are like the Star Wars series, right? Episodes 4, 5, and 6 came out back in the 70s and the 80s. Years later, episodes 1, 2, and 3 finally came out, talked about how Darth Vader was like as a kid, to a teenager, to an adult, and also how Obi-Wan Kenobi was when he was a student or a Padawan, and how Darth Sidious also rise into power. So all of that prequel really does justice to what a lot of people have been wondering. Why are things the way they are, and why are people the way they are? I mean, some prequels don't always make it through, but you know what, it still makes it onto the big screen, because you still answer that question of you know why is it you know that things are this way, or why are people this way. And so you know origin stories can always lead or bring out you know a lot of like curiosity, and create curiosity, just like creativity, can create more stories. And nowadays it's like sometimes, instead of going forward, sometimes we do have to go backwards, to the past, and reveal like what it is that was the cause to the effects of the movie we just watched. It's like, gosh, we can go through like a whole bunch of list of like prequels and like origin stories of like different characters and different movies and TV series. But that could be a talk for another time. But no, it's just, I encourage a lot of people, especially writers, to start looking into history, whether it be U.S. history, Russian history, European history, Asian history. I mean, like, just there's history everywhere, and there's stories everywhere. And, you know, all of that is very, very similar. It's kind of like, you know, a coin with two sides, but then it's like those two sides are a story in history. And it's just absolutely gonna be mind blowing for a lot of people when they come to realize why things are the way they are. And it's gonna spark up a lot of ideas, and I highly recommend you guys do that. And it could be even where you live. It's like, what's the history of like the area that you lived in, or maybe the house that you lived in, or maybe a restaurant that you went to. What's the history behind the food, or the name of that restaurant? So history is absolutely fascinating, as well as origin stories, which is you know completely all leading up to maybe the next great film. And for all you photographers out there too, it's like, just when you're taking pictures, do more than just take a picture, but also learn about the history of what's in that picture you just captured, because that's exactly what people go to art galleries for too, is to not just admire something beautiful, but also the story behind it. So that's just you know something that's worth capturing.